I went camping alone in early October, during that strange time when the days still feel warm but the nights drop so cold that the air burns a little when you breathe. I had been working non-stop for months, always around people, always dealing with noise and deadlines. I wanted a trip that felt empty. Just me, the trees, and a bit of silence. I chose a remote section of forest that was marked on the map but barely talked about online. I didn't want crowded trails or loud campsites. I wanted to disappear for a weekend and feel small in a good way. The trailhead was already quiet when I arrived. My car was the only one there. A small wooden sign leaned to one side. The letters faded and cracked. The path leading into the trees was narrow and covered with fallen pine needles that softened every step. The forest looked peaceful, but the deeper I went, the more it felt like walking into something that didn't want to be disturbed. I hiked for hours. The sun dropped behind the trees earlier than I expected, leaving long shadows that stretched across the ground like dark fingers. The air got colder too, enough that I could see my breath even though it was still afternoon. I kept pushing forward, thinking I would find a wide clearing or a lake to camp near, but the forest stayed tight around me. Thick trees, dense brush, fallen branches everywhere. After a while, I accepted that I needed to pick a spot before I lost the last bit of daylight. I found a small open patch between a slanted hill and a cluster of tall pines. It wasn't perfect, but it felt hidden and protected from the wind. I set up my tent near the base of the hill. The ground was uneven, but it felt like the best option. I laid out my gear, made a small fire, and watched the last bit of sunlight disappear between the branches. The forest grew colder by the minute. The sound of the fire cracking was the only thing that reminded me I wasn't completely alone. When darkness took over, everything changed. The forest didn't feel calm anymore. The shadows looked thicker, the trees looked taller, and the silence felt deeper. Every small sound echoed too loudly. The pop of a burning log, the rustle of leaves shifting, the creaking of old branches. I couldn't see far without my flashlight, and even with it, the beam felt too weak, like it only pushed back a small circle of darkness. I crawled into my tent around 10 p.m. The ground under me was cold and hard, and even with 2 layers of clothing, the air felt sharp on my skin. I lay still, listening. The forest wasn't loud, but it wasn't silent either. I could hear faint movement, maybe small animals, maybe just the trees settling. It didn't worry me at first. I drifted off for a bit. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up suddenly, and the moment my eyes opened, I knew something wasn't right. The forest had gone silent, completely silent. No wind, no rustling, no creaking, just a cold, dead stillness, the kind that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I lay there, barely breathing, trying to figure out if something had woken me or if it was just the cold. Then I heard it, a slow, intentional crunch of leaves. Not close, not far, just beyond the thin wall of my tent. It was a sound that didn't match any animal I knew. It wasn't the quick scamper of a rabbit or the heavy steps of a deer. It was careful. One foot, then the other. Deliberate. Human. My heart hammered so hard I could hear the blood moving in my ears. I didn't move. I didn't even adjust my sleeping bag. I stared at the top of the tent, watching the fabric gently shift from my own breathing. The steps moved closer. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. They were circling my campsite. I gripped the small knife I kept near me, even though I knew it wouldn't do much. The steps continued slowly around the tent, each one spaced out like whoever or whatever was out there was trying not to make noise. They stopped near the hill, the highest point above my tent. Then there was a long moment of nothing, just dead, heavy silence. I hoped the person or animal had moved on, but then I heard the sound that froze every part of me. The faint sound of dirt sliding. Someone was at the top of the hill, standing directly above my tent. The ground sloped enough that whoever stood there could easily see the shape of my tent from above. They could see the shadow of my body inside. They could watch me without making any noise at all. My breathing turned shallow. I tightened my grip on the knife even though it trembled in my hand. I expected something, a step, a breath, anything. But the silence just stretched on. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. I couldn't tell anymore. I stayed awake the entire time, not daring to close my eyes. Eventually I heard slow, almost silent movement, small pieces of dirt rolling down the slope, then soft steps moving away through the leaves. The sound faded until I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat. I didn't sleep again. I listened for every sound until the sky finally brightened. When the first thin light of morning touched the tent, I unzipped it and stepped outside, shivering from cold and fear. The air felt too still. The hill beside my campsite looked normal at first, but then I noticed it. Clear marks in the dirt. Not large, not deep, but fresh enough that they hadn't existed the night before. Pair of footprints, human, pointing directly toward my tent. I felt my stomach drop. My legs felt weak. The prints led down the hill, then disappeared into the forest. Whoever had been there had stood long enough to leave marks, but not long enough to be caught. I packed my gear without eating or drinking anything. My hands shook the whole time. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing between the trees, watching me again. I could feel eyes even if I didn't see any. As I hiked back, every sound made me turn around. Every branch snap felt too close, but I didn't see anyone. Not once. The forest stayed silent behind me, as if it was holding its breath. When I reached the trailhead, my car was still alone. But something was different this time. On the back window, drawn into the thin layer of dirt from the drive-in, was a long fingerprint streak. Not from me. I don't touch my windows like that. And it wasn't from a leaf or a branch brushing against it. It was a deliberate drag of a finger, straight down, slow. Someone had touched my car. Someone had followed me far enough to do it. I got inside, locked the doors, and drove away fast. The farther I got from the forest, the more the tight feeling in my chest faded, but it never fully went away. Even now, months later, when I think about it, I still feel that same cold silence from the moment I woke up. I still picture someone standing above my tent, staring at the shape of my body through the thin fabric, waiting without making a sound. And the part that stays with me the most, the part that makes me feel sick every time I remember it, is knowing this. Whoever was up there watching me didn't want to rob me or hurt me right away. They could have. They were close enough. They just wanted to see me. They wanted to stand in the dark and listen to me breathe. And they wanted to make sure I knew I wasn't alone out there. I went camping to get a break from everything. I didn't pick a popular campground or a busy trail. I wanted silence, real silence, the kind that makes you hear your own thoughts clearly. I picked a deep forest area I found online, a place where the trail wasn't maintained anymore, but still existed enough for experienced hikers. I told myself I was prepared. I had a tent, food, water, a knife, 2 flashlights, extra batteries, a first aid kit, and a map. I thought that was enough. I had done smaller trips before, so this one felt like it would be just another break from people, noise, and stress. The drive to the trailhead was long and empty. The farther I went, the fewer houses I saw, then fewer cars, then none. The road got narrower and bumpier, lined with tall trees that blocked most of the sunlight. By the time I reached the small dirt pull-off where the trail began, there was not a single other vehicle. The only sound was the wind moving through the branches. I stepped out, stretched, and took a deep breath of the cold air. It smelled like wet leaves and old soil. I put my backpack on and started hiking. The trail was narrow, partly covered by fallen leaves and branches. Every few steps, something cracked under my boots. I didn't see any footprints ahead of me. The forest was thick, and the farther I went, the heavier the silence felt. Even the birds sounded distant. The trees were tall and close together, almost forming walls around the trail. After about 2 hours, I reached a clearing big enough for my tent. There was a fallen log, some flat ground, and a small trickling stream a little downhill. It looked perfect. I set up my tent slowly, taking my time to make sure everything was tight and secure. I collected some wood and made a small fire, heating up some canned food. The crackling of the fire was the only sound around me. I sat on my sleeping bag and watched the flames rise and fall. The sun started dropping behind the trees, and shadows stretched across the ground like long, dark fingers. I felt a small chill crawl over my skin, but I blamed it on the cold. When it got dark, I turned on my flashlight and walked a little around the area. The beam cut through the darkness, showing me every detail of the forest floor: roots, rocks, dead leaves. The deeper it got into night, the more it felt like the forest had stopped breathing. The air was still. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. I tried to shake off the feeling and return to my tent. I lay inside my sleeping bag, listening to the distant sound of the stream. I was almost asleep when I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a small crunch like a footstep on dry leaves. I held my breath. Another slow crunch, then silence. I told myself it was an animal, a deer, maybe a raccoon, but something about the rhythm didn't feel like an animal. It sounded too controlled, too careful. Eventually, I drifted off. When the morning came, the fear faded with the daylight. The forest looked normal again. I made breakfast, cleaned up, and took a long walk along the stream. I found old fallen trees covered in moss, a small rocky section where the water flowed faster, and a slope leading to a thicker part of the woods. That's when I noticed something strange. A tree with a piece of rope tied tightly around it. The rope was old and sun-faded but still strong. It didn't look like something left by campers. It looked intentional. I backed away from it, trying to calm the uneasiness forming in my stomach. When I returned to my campsite, I noticed another small thing that made my heart beat faster. My backpack looked slightly moved. Not opened, not rummaged through, but shifted a few inches. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had bumped it earlier, or maybe it slid on the ground. But a part of me knew I wouldn't just leave it like that. Something was off. That night was worse. After the sun disappeared, the forest turned completely silent again. I tried to relax by the fire, but the fire did nothing to calm my nerves. Every sound in the trees felt sharper. I sat inside my tent, listening. Hours passed. The cold crept deeper into the forest. And then the noises returned. Not footsteps this time. Something bigger. Something moving slowly but not trying to hide it. Branches cracked. Leaves crushed. Something dragged or brushed against the ground. It circled the area. It wasn't random. It was moving around my clearing. My heart thumped so hard I felt it in my throat. I didn't unzip my tent. I didn't move. I didn't dare turn on my flashlight. I just held the knife in my hand and stayed frozen. The noises would get close, maybe 10 feet away, then drift off, then come close again from another angle. I could feel the presence of someone or something watching my tent. It went on for hours. I barely slept. When the sun rose, the noises finally stopped. I got out of the tent slowly, every muscle in my body tense and stiff from fear. And that's when I saw the footprints. Human footprints. Deep ones. Not mine. Not even close to my size. They were around the campsite, behind the tent, near the fire pit, close to my backpack. Someone had been walking around while I was inside pretending to sleep. Someone had been standing behind my tent in the middle of the night while I clenched my knife in the dark. My stomach dropped. I felt lightheaded. I knew I couldn't stay for another night. I packed everything fast. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped things twice. I checked the tree line over and over, expecting someone to step out at any moment. When I finally started hiking back toward the car, I kept looking behind me every minute. I walked fast at first, then faster, then practically jogged through the forest. About halfway back, I noticed something else that made everything worse. Broken branches on both sides of the trail. Fresh ones, like someone had been following me or walking parallel to me in the forest. I heard faint cracking sounds to my right at one point, but I didn't look. I didn't want to see anything. I just moved. By the time I reached my car, I was sweating, shaking, and completely drained. I threw my backpack into the back seat, got inside, and locked the doors immediately. I sat there for a minute, catching my breath, staring at the empty trailhead and the thick forest behind it. Part of me expected someone to walk out of the trees. Nobody did. I started the engine and drove away as fast as I safely could. All the way down the mountain, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Even when I reached regular roads, towns, and other cars, The fear stayed inside me like a cold stone in my stomach. I didn't stop until I got home. I never found out who it was. I never told the police because I didn't have proof of a crime. Only footprints, rope around a tree, and someone circling my tent for hours. But I know what I experienced. Someone was living out there. Someone who watched campers. Someone who followed silently through the trees. Someone who stayed close enough to touch my tent but never spoke. Never showed themselves, never ran away. Months have passed, but I still think about it. I still imagine those footprints, the slow crunch of leaves, the circles around my campsite. I still hear those noises when I try to sleep sometimes. I still picture the forest swallowing me up if I had stayed one more night. I still go camping, but never alone anymore. Never deep in the woods. Never in a place where the silence feels heavy. That trip taught me the most important thing I've ever learned out there. The scariest part of the wilderness isn't the animals, the weather, or getting lost. It's the people who choose to hide in the deep, dark places, watching from behind the trees, waiting until the sun goes down and you're all alone with nothing but thin tent walls between you and them. And once you've experienced that, the forest never feels peaceful again. I went camping alone at a place called Miller Ridge, a spot I had seen on a map for years but never visited. It was one of those areas that didn't have much written about it online. No reviews, no warnings, nothing. Just a thin marked trail on the map and a short note saying primitive camping allowed. I thought that meant it would be quiet and empty, the perfect escape from the stress I had been dragging around for months. I didn't think about the fact that remote places are remote for a reason. I parked my car at a small pull-off on the side of an old road. There was no official parking lot, just enough dirt cleared for one car. The forest looked thick and heavy, like it hadn't been touched in a long time. The trailhead was a faded wooden post with a half-rotted sign pointing upward into the trees. As I started the hike, I felt the temperature drop almost immediately. The air was cold in a way that slipped under your clothes slowly and stayed there. The trail was narrow and uneven. Roots twisted across the ground and fallen branches forced me to duck or step over them every few minutes. It was the kind of place where you had to watch every step to avoid twisting an ankle. The forest felt dense, almost claustrophobic. The trees grew close together, blocking most of the sky. Only small patches of light came through the branches, and even those faded as the afternoon went on. I hiked for hours, steadily climbing. The ridge wasn't steep, but it went on for a long time. When I finally reached the top, the trail opened into a small flat clearing with a few smooth rocks, some old tree stumps, and a pretty wide view of the valley below. It wasn't perfect, but it was a good place to camp. I felt a small bit of relief knowing I didn't have to keep walking in the dim light. I set up my tent near a stump that looked like it had been cut decades ago. The bark around it had peeled off and moss had grown thick on its surface. I unpacked my gear, set up my sleeping bag, and gathered dry sticks for a fire. The air felt colder every minute. The wind didn't push through the trees. It slipped through them quietly, making the branches shake just enough to sound like steps far away. I tried to ignore it and focused on getting the fire going. By the time the sun dropped, the temperature fell fast. The fire was the only warm thing around me, and even that didn't feel strong enough. The forest around me got darker and darker until the trees looked like tall black pillars. The valley below disappeared completely, swallowed by the night. I felt a little uneasy, but I blamed the solitude. Camping alone always brought some nervousness. Eventually, I turned in for the night. I put out the fire, crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and wrapped myself tightly in my sleeping bag. The ground was uneven and the cold crept through it into my bones. I lay there listening to the distant sounds of the forest, the faint rustling of branches, and the soft cracking of wood. Nothing sounded threatening at first. Felt normal. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to complete silence. A type of silence that didn't feel natural. No wind, no rustling, no movement. Just an empty stillness that wrapped around the tent like a thick blanket. It made my skin crawl immediately. Then I heard something. A faint crunch of leaves. Came from somewhere beyond the tent. Slow, deliberate, Not the random scattering of small animals, not the heavy steps of a larger one. This was rhythmic, steady, and unsettlingly controlled. I held my breath and listened. Another crunch, then another. Someone was walking near my campsite. The footsteps were measured, like the person was taking their time, stepping carefully. It didn't make sense. There were no other cars at the trailhead, no signs of hikers, no campfire smoke from anywhere else. I had been alone the entire hike. The steps drifted closer. The cold air outside seemed to seep through the tent walls. I felt sweat build on the back of my neck even though the temperature inside the tent was freezing. The footsteps reached the edge of my campsite and stopped. I felt like my heart was punching against my ribs. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. The silence outside was so thick that I could hear the faint ringing in my ears. Then there was a new sound, a slow drag of something across the dirt. It was so soft that I almost thought I imagined it. But then it came again, longer and clearer. Something or someone was dragging their foot or something else across the ground, making a trail in the dirt just outside my tent. I tightened my grip on the small knife I kept beside my sleeping bag. My hand shook badly. I knew the knife wouldn't help much, but it was all I had. The dragging sound stopped, followed by a soft thump, like something being set down on the ground. Then nothing. No steps. No movement. Just silence. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time felt stretched out and distorted. The longer the silence lasted, the worse the fear got. Whoever was out there wasn't leaving. They were just standing still, waiting. I could feel them. I could almost sense a presence through the thin fabric of the tent. I didn't dare lift my head. I didn't dare unzip the tent. I just lay there, my ears straining for any sign of movement. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I heard the footsteps again. Soft, slow, retreating into the forest. They grew fainter and fainter until they were gone completely. I didn't sleep after that. I kept my knife in my hand and stared at the top of the tent, waiting for the faintest sound. My mind kept imagining someone standing right outside again, listening to me breathe. When the sky finally brightened, I crawled out of the tent, my whole body stiff and shaky. The air was icy, my breath puffed out in a white cloud. I scanned the campsite immediately. That's when I saw it. In the dirt right in front of the tent door, a long line had been dragged straight across the ground, about 2 feet long. At the end of it, pressed into the soil, was a single clear print. A boot print, human. The dragging line looked like someone had crouched or knelt there, maybe leaning on something, maybe just stopping to listen. The print faced the tent directly. Whoever had been there had stood only a few feet from me while I slept inside. I felt my stomach drop. My throat tightened. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watched. I packed up as fast as I possibly could. My hands shook so much I kept dropping things. I didn't care how messy my pack looked. I just wanted to get out. As I hiked back down, I kept hearing faint sounds behind me. Not close, not loud. Just enough that I kept turning around. Every few minutes, I saw movement between the trees far behind me. Not animals. Shapes. Human shapes. I walked faster. The shapes stayed distant, but they never fully disappeared. It was like someone was following me slowly, keeping just enough distance that I couldn't see them clearly. When I reached my car, my relief was instant, but it didn't last. On the back door of my car, in the thin layer of dust on the paint, someone had traced a finger down the surface, leaving a long vertical smear. Under it, a second shorter smear curved sideways like someone had drawn a simple, rough shape. At first, I didn't understand what it was supposed to be. Then I realized it was the shape of a tent, and the long smear above it was a line coming down on top of it. Someone had drawn a picture of where I slept and marked the spot directly above it. Someone had been watching from the ridge by my campsite. Someone had stood there long enough to draw that before I returned. I got inside, locked the doors, and drove away without looking back. My hands were shaking so hard that I could barely keep the wheel straight. I never went camping alone again, and the part that sticks with me the most, even now, is the simple truth I learned that night. In the deep woods, you don't hear people who want to be heard. You only hear the ones who want you to know they were there. The quiet ones are the ones you never notice until they decide it's time. I never planned on camping alone that weekend. It just happened because everyone else backed out at the last minute. I should have taken that as a sign, but I had already packed my gear, bought food, and taken time off. I told myself it would be quiet, peaceful, and good for my mind. I didn't realize how different things feel when you're deep in the woods with no one around you, and how fast peace can turn into something that feels like a slow, steady threat. I drove into the national forest late in the afternoon. The sky was dull gray, the kind where you know the sun is still up there but it doesn't feel like it. The air was heavy with that cold, earthy smell that comes right before rain. The trail I picked wasn't popular, which I liked, but I also knew that meant fewer people walking around and less chance for help if something went wrong. Still, I pushed through that feeling because I wanted to prove to myself I could handle a weekend alone outdoors. My backpack felt heavier than usual as I hiked in. Every sound seemed sharper, like the crunch of leaves under my boots or the snap of small branches. A couple of times I turned around because I thought something was behind me, but it was always just the forest settling or a squirrel running through the brush. I kept moving until I reached a small clearing near a narrow stream. It was quiet, too quiet, and the trees were packed tightly around the area, their branches hooking over each other like hands blocking out half the sky. I set up my tent facing the stream so I could hear the water at night. I thought it would help me sleep. I didn't realize how much that same sound would hide other noises when the sun went down. I cooked a small meal before the sky finally got dark. The shadows in the trees grew so deep they looked like thick curtains hanging all around me. I tried not to think about it. I kept my head down and cleaned up my little cooking spot. The air grew colder fast, and the silence made my chest feel tight. Even the stream sounded different once the sun was gone. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It sounded louder, almost like a distraction from everything else in the forest. I crawled into my tent and zipped myself in. I tried to relax, but the ground felt harder than usual. The air felt thinner, and the darkness outside felt too thick to ignore. I kept my flashlight close, even though the beam barely cut through anything outside. I lay there listening to the stream and hoping I'd eventually fall asleep. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why. My heart was beating too fast, and I felt like something had pulled me awake on purpose. I lay still, waiting for my breathing to calm down. Then I heard it, soft steps in the leaves right outside my tent. They were slow and unsteady, like someone trying to move quietly but not knowing how. The steps stopped near the back of my tent, close to where my head was. I stopped breathing without meaning to. I felt frozen. The only thing I could hear was the water moving behind me and whatever was standing just a few feet away. I tried to think of what it could be. Maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the steps were too spaced out, too heavy. They sounded like someone walking in shoes, not an animal. I waited, my whole body tense, expecting the sound to move again. After a long moment, the steps continued, circling slowly around the tent, keeping the same slow, steady pace. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I stared at the tent wall where the darkness pressed against the fabric. Then the steps stopped again, this time right at the entrance. I felt a wave of heat move through my body even though the air was freezing. I could hear breathing now. It wasn't loud, but I could hear it through the thin tent fabric. Slow, controlled, like someone trying not to make noise. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a weapon besides a small camping knife, and that wouldn't matter much if someone decided to pull the zipper open. I lay there for what felt like forever. I kept imagining a hand grabbing the zipper and pulling it down, but it never happened. The breathing stayed there for a little longer, then the steps moved away, still slow, still careful. Eventually the sound faded into the trees. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. I didn't even close my eyes. Every time the wind pushed a branch or a squirrel moved through the brush, I felt my whole body tighten. I waited until the first bit of pale morning light showed through the tent before I even thought about unzipping it. When I finally stepped outside, everything looked normal. Too normal. No footprints, no torn branches, nothing to tell me what I heard. But I knew what I heard. I wasn't imagining it. I packed my things fast. I didn't even cook breakfast. I just shoved everything into my backpack and started hiking out. I kept looking behind me, convinced someone was watching me. The forest felt wrong. The air felt heavier, and the silence felt deeper. I didn't hear any birds or animals the whole hike back. It was like everything in the woods was hiding. When I reached the trailhead, I saw something that made my stomach twist. On the wooden board where people sign in before going into the forest, someone had added a line under my name. Same handwriting as mine, same pen color, but I didn't write it. It said, "One more still in the woods." It didn't make sense at first. I stood there staring at it, trying to understand what it meant. Then it hit me. Someone must have been there before I left. Someone must have watched me sign in, waited until I walked away, then added that line. They knew I was alone. They knew where I was camping. They knew something else, something I didn't want to think about. I left the forest fast. I didn't look back. Even when I got to my car, I checked the back seat before getting in. I drove the whole way home with my hands tight on the wheel, feeling like someone was sitting just behind the trees watching me drive away. When I got home, I couldn't shake the thought that whoever walked around my tent didn't go there by accident. They picked my campsite on purpose. They moved slowly on purpose. They stood at the tent entrance on purpose. And they didn't take anything or try anything that night, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. They just wanted me to know they were there. That was enough. I haven't camped alone again. I don't think I ever will. Sometimes at night, when it's quiet and I'm lying in bed, I still hear those slow, careful steps circling my tent. And the worst part is knowing that it wasn't a ghost or a creature or anything supernatural. It was just a person. A real person who walked right up to where I slept and breathed quietly outside the thin fabric of my tent. A person who wanted me to wake up and hear them. And for me, that is far more terrifying than anything else in the world. I went camping alone because I needed a break from everything in my life. Work had been stressful, my mind was always full, and I wanted a place where I could hear myself think again. I chose a spot deep in the mountains, far away from any popular trails. It was one of those places where you don't meet other hikers unless they get lost or they're purposely avoiding crowds. I wanted quiet, so I didn't think twice about it. I packed everything I thought I might need. A strong tent, extra water, food, a portable stove, a knife, 2 flashlights, spare batteries, and a power bank for my phone. I left early in the morning when the sky was still pale and empty. The drive alone felt strange. I barely passed any cars. As I got closer to the mountains, the road narrowed until it was just a single-lane strip of old asphalt with cracks running through it. Trees leaned over it, blocking most of the sunlight. By the time I reached the tiny dirt parking area near the start of the trail, I realized I hadn't seen another person for almost an hour. That should have been a sign, but I didn't think much of it then. The hike into the woods was harder than I thought it would be. The trail was overgrown in places, and in others, it disappeared completely under fallen branches and leaves. I had to push branches aside, step over huge roots, and duck under low-hanging limbs that scratched at my backpack. There were no sounds except birds and sometimes the wind moving through the trees. It felt peaceful at first, but after a while the quiet started to feel heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. I finally found a clearing that looked good enough to set up camp. The ground was mostly flat, just a few dips here and there. A narrow stream cut through the far edge of the clearing, which meant I had water if I needed more. I set up my tent, hammered the stakes into the dirt, gathered wood for a fire, and heated some food. Eating alone in the middle of nowhere with nothing but trees around me felt calming, almost like the world had paused. When the sun started to set, I took a short walk around the area. I followed the stream for a while, stepping on wet rocks and listening to the sound of the water. The deeper the sky got, the more shadows formed between the trees. The forest looked different at dusk, thicker and more closed in. I turned back once I felt like the darkness was about to swallow everything. Night came quickly. I sat by the fire until it burned down to small glowing pieces, then crawled into my tent. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the woods. Everything felt normal at first. the gentle rush of the stream, the occasional snap of a twig from some distant animal, the breeze brushing through the branches. But after about an hour, when the forest usually gets quieter, I heard something that didn't fit. Footsteps. Not fast, not panicked, not random. Slow, careful, deliberate. They were somewhere past the tree line, moving in a steady rhythm. I held my breath and listened. The steps stopped. I waited. After a long silence, I told myself it was an animal and forced myself to sleep, though it took a long time. When I woke up in the morning, the forest felt normal again. The sunlight pushed away the fear of the night. I convinced myself it must have been a deer or something walking through. I made breakfast, packed my bag, and went deeper into the woods to explore. That's when I first noticed the strange details. A tree with fresh knife marks carved into the bark. A pile of rocks stacked in a small pyramid shape, too perfect to be natural. A rusted can half buried in the dirt, like someone had camped here recently but didn't bother to clean up. The farther I walked, the more signs I saw. Footprints that didn't match mine. An old rope tied between two trees, a broken shoe sole left near a log. It felt like someone lived out there, moving from spot to spot, never staying long. I turned back to my campsite, uneasy but trying to stay calm. The day passed slowly. I tried to relax, but my mind kept replaying the footsteps I heard. When night fell again, the fear came crawling back with the darkness. And then the noises started. Not footsteps this time, something heavier, something moving around the edge of the clearing. I lay completely still inside my tent, barely breathing, holding my knife tight in my hand. The sound would get close, then stop, then start again somewhere else. It felt like someone was circling my campsite, watching, waiting. The worst part was how slow the movements were, like whoever it was didn't care if I heard them. I didn't sleep at all. When the sun finally came up, I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't even eat. I just needed to leave. That was when I saw the footprints. Dozens of them, clear and deep in the soft dirt. They weren't mine. They were large, like a grown man's, and they led straight from the trees to the area right beside my tent. They didn't circle from far away. They came close, right up to where I slept, and then vanished back into the trees. My blood went cold. Someone had been standing right next to me while I was inside my tent, pretending to sleep. I grabbed my pack and started walking fast. I didn't even try to follow the trail. I just wanted out. The woods looked different now, darker, heavier. Every tree felt like it hid someone. Every sound made me freeze. I kept checking behind me, convinced someone was following. At one point, I heard branches breaking behind me. Fast. Like someone was moving quickly but trying to stay quiet. I didn't look. I just kept going, pushing myself through the forest, sliding down slopes, climbing over fallen logs, scraping my legs on thorns. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Hours later, when I finally stumbled onto the dirt road near the trailhead, I felt like I might collapse. I kept looking over my shoulder every few seconds. My car was the only one there, just like before. I threw my pack inside, locked the doors immediately, and sat there with my hands shaking. When I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone step out of the tree line. But no one did. I never saw who it was. I never learned their name, their face, or their reason. But I know they were real. The footprints were real. The circling footsteps were real. The knife marks on the trees, the rope, the rusted cans, all of it was real. Someone lived out there. Someone followed me. Someone stood outside my tent while I tried to sleep. And the worst part is that the forest never warned me. It didn't feel dangerous until it was too late. Since that trip, I haven't gone deep camping again. I stick to marked campgrounds with other people nearby. I keep my phone charged. I stay in open areas, and I never ignore strange sounds anymore. That experience taught me something I'll never forget. You can prepare for the weather, for wild animals, for getting lost. But you can't prepare for the people who choose to hide far away from society, watching strangers from the shadows of the trees. And once you realize they're there, the forest never feels the same again. I remember the day I decided to go camping like it was yesterday, even though it was months ago. I had been craving the silence of the woods, the escape from city noise, the kind of emptiness that lets you breathe. I picked a spot I had never been to before, a trailhead deep in the mountains, far from any major roads. It wasn't a popular campground. It was the kind of place you had to find by looking at old maps and trusting your instincts. I wanted solitude, and I got it, or so I thought. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that makes shadows heavy and the forest feel thicker. The parking area was empty, except for one old pickup truck parked by the trail. I didn't think much of it. People do come and go. I slung my backpack over my shoulder and started the hike. The path was narrow, overgrown, and full of roots that threatened to trip me with every step. I had my gear well organized: a tent, sleeping bag, stove, water, and some canned food. I kept my knife strapped to my belt and my flashlight in my pocket. I didn't think I'd need it yet. I always like to be prepared. The hike took longer than I expected. The forest swallowed the light quickly, even though it was just late afternoon. By the time I found a clearing suitable for my tent, the sun was almost gone, the sky a deep blue-gray. I set up my small campsite near a cluster of trees. There was a small stream nearby which would be good for water, and the clearing was flat enough to keep my tent stable. I started a small fire to cook my beans and rice. Smoke rose into the darkening sky, blending with the damp smell of wet leaves and pine. I was alone, or so I kept telling myself. The quiet was heavy but comforting. After dinner, I went for a short walk to explore the area. I wanted to get a sense of my surroundings before it got too dark. The woods were dense, and every sound seemed louder. The rustle of leaves, a bird flapping away, the distant crack of a branch under some unseen creature's weight. I kept my flashlight close, its beam cutting through the darkness in a tight cone. The forest looked endless, like it could stretch forever in any direction. I found some rocks near the stream, wet and slippery, and sat for a while. The water was cold, rushing over them with a steady murmur. It was peaceful, almost hypnotic. As night fell, I returned to my campsite. I double-checked my tent stakes, put my food in a bear-proof container, and settled in. That's when I first noticed the smell. It was faint, but unmistakable, metallic, like blood. I froze trying to locate it. The stream was just over there, but the water didn't carry that smell. Came from the direction of the trail. My heart started to beat faster. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a small predator. I tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The first noises came around midnight. I was just drifting off when I heard the snapping of twigs, first far, then closer, closer still. My flashlight was on the table beside me, and I grabbed it without thinking. Shining it toward the sound, I caught a glimpse of movement through the trees. Something or someone was there, just beyond the edge of the clearing. I couldn't see clearly, but I could make out a shadow, tall and thin, moving slowly. I held my breath. The noise stopped. I stayed awake the rest of the night, barely sleeping, my ears straining for the slightest sound. Every rustle, every crack, every shift of the wind through the trees made me tense. By morning, I was exhausted, but nothing had come closer than that first night. I packed up quickly, my nerves raw, and started down the trail. Then I noticed the signs. Footprints. They weren't animal prints, they were human. Fresh, large, leading toward my campsite, then back into the woods. Panic rose in me, a cold, sharp panic. Whoever had been near me had been watching. I thought about leaving immediately, but I didn't want to run blindly through the forest, not knowing what was ahead. So I stayed on the trail, moving cautiously, looking for more signs. Hours passed, and I didn't see anyone, but the forest felt alive in a way that was different from before. Every sound seemed deliberate. Birds stayed silent. I found broken branches at odd angles, trampled underbrush. The trail I thought I knew began to feel like a trap. I slowed, scanning, listening. The sun was high now, filtering through the canopy, and yet the shadows were long, thick, suffocating. By afternoon, I reached a point where the trail split. I hesitated. One path led up a steep slope, The other descended toward what looked like an abandoned cabin on the map. I chose the cabin, hoping for shelter and maybe some clue if anyone else was nearby. The cabin was old, boarded up, windows cracked, roof sagging, but it was better than nothing. I hid behind a tree and watched it for a while, then slowly approached. Inside, dust covered the floor, and cobwebs hung from the corners. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. But there were signs someone had been there recently. A half-burned candle, footprints in the dust, scraps of food wrappers. Someone had been here and they might still be nearby. I spent the night hidden behind the cabin, too afraid to sleep but trying to conserve energy. The noises returned, distant at first, then unmistakable. Footsteps around the perimeter, whispers I couldn't make out, shadows flitting just beyond the trees. I stayed low, moving as little as possible, clutching my knife. I remembered my phone was in my pack, and I hoped there was signal. There wasn't. The next morning, I made a plan. I waited until the forest was quiet, then ran along a faint path I had seen earlier that led downhill. My body ached, my legs trembling from fear and fatigue. I focused only on moving forward. Hours later, I stumbled into a ranger station, out of breath, covered in dirt and scratches, but alive. The rangers listened as I explained, skeptical at first, until they checked the trails and found evidence I described. Footprints, broken branches, signs of someone living off the land near the trails. They told me that occasionally, people would go into those mountains, living off the forest, sometimes watching hikers, sometimes more aggressive. I didn't get specifics. They called it an off-the-grid survivalist issue, but I didn't care. I had survived. Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to being trapped or worse. The mountains, the forest, the quiet, they were beautiful, but they had a dark side. Solitude can be peaceful, yes, but it can also be dangerous when you're truly alone. I've been back to the woods since, but I never go that deep again. I stick to trails, to popular spots, and I keep my phone close. That trip left a mark. I can still feel the tension, the constant awareness, the fear that never quite left me in those woods. But it also gave me a respect I hadn't had before, a respect for nature, for the unknown, and for the unpredictability of people. I learned to trust my instincts, to prepare, and to remember that in the wilderness, sometimes survival isn't about strength. It's about patience, caution, and noticing the small details that might save your life. Even now, months later, I think about the forest, the smell of wet pine, the sound of water over rocks, and the shadows just beyond the light. I feel a shiver run down my spine, but I also feel grateful. Grateful that I made it out. Grateful that I could tell the story. And grateful that I learned the hard way that sometimes being alone in the wild is not just about facing nature. It's about facing the people who choose to hide within it. I had planned this camping trip for weeks, thinking it would be a simple weekend in the mountains. I wanted to get away from the city, the noise, the constant pressure of work and people. I packed my car the night before, checking and double-checking my gear. A tent, sleeping bag, water, stove, flashlight, extra batteries, a first aid kit, and a small pack of non-perishable food. I left early in the morning to avoid traffic, taking back roads and smaller highways to reach the trailhead. The drive was long, winding through stretches of dense forest and fields, the sun barely rising through a thin layer of fog. By the time I reached the parking lot at the trailhead, I could see that it wasn't a popular spot. There were no other cars, just an old wooden sign marking the beginning of the trail. The forest beyond looked dense and almost impenetrable, a mixture of pine, oak, and thick underbrush. I hoisted my backpack and started walking. The trail was narrow, barely wider than a footpath, and it was overgrown in parts. Branches scratched at my arms, and roots tripped me with every step. I could hear birds singing faintly, though the sounds were distant, muted by the dense trees. I was alone, and I felt a mix of excitement and unease. The forest had a way of closing in around you, making you hyper-aware of every movement, every sound. After a few hours of hiking, I found a clearing that seemed suitable for camping. The ground was uneven in parts, but I managed to find a spot flat enough for my tent. A small creek ran nearby, the sound of water trickling over rocks creating a peaceful background noise. I set up my tent carefully, making sure the stakes were secure, then gathered some wood for a fire. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows that made the forest feel even denser. I built a small fire, just enough to cook my dinner and keep the chill away. The smell of wet pine and earth mixed with the smoke from the fire. I ate quietly, listening to the forest around me, feeling a strange tension that I couldn't explain. Once it got dark, I decided to take a short walk along the creek to explore. The flashlight cut a narrow path through the blackness, illuminating moss-covered rocks and the occasional small animal scurrying away. I noticed the quiet first, a heavy, unnatural quiet. Birds and insects had disappeared, leaving only the sound of my footsteps and the creek. That's when I heard it, a branch snapping behind me. I froze, straining to see through the dark. The beam of my flashlight cut through the trees, but I saw nothing. I told myself it was probably a deer or some small animal, but the tension in my chest didn't ease. I hurried back to the campsite, my senses on high alert. I stayed awake much of the night, the sound of the creek and the occasional rustle of leaves keeping me on edge. At one point, I thought I heard voices low and muffled, though I was alone, or at least I should have been. The thought that someone might be out there, hidden in the trees watching me, made my heart race. I kept my knife close, my flashlight within reach, and I tried not to make any noise. The night dragged on, long and unbroken except for the occasional snap of a branch somewhere beyond the clearing. Morning came slowly. I was exhausted, my muscles stiff from lying on the hard ground and my nerves frayed from lack of sleep. I packed my things quickly, determined to continue the hike rather than stay in the clearing any longer. That's when I noticed the first sign that something was very wrong. Footprints, large and human, led from the edge of my campsite into the trees. They were fresh, the soil still soft from last night's rain. Panic gripped me. Someone had been there, moving quietly enough to avoid detection, and they had left no other trace except these prints. I followed the trail cautiously, keeping to the high ground whenever possible, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. Hours passed. The trail twisted and turned, and the forest seemed to grow darker and thicker the farther I went. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me tense. At one point, I stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. A small fire pit, a few flattened areas of grass where someone had slept, a torn piece of cloth caught in a tree. It looked recent. Whoever had been following me, or perhaps living off the forest, was skilled at staying hidden. I didn't linger. I moved as quietly as I could, keeping my eyes on the ground and the path ahead. By late afternoon, I realized I was lost. The trail had become almost unrecognizable, covered in fallen leaves and broken branches. I hadn't seen anyone, but I felt watched. The forest around me seemed alive, every shadow moving in the corner of my eye. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. The creek I had followed earlier was nowhere to be seen. My heart pounded with each step, and sweat mixed with the dirt on my face. I finally spotted a small, abandoned cabin off the trail. Its wood was gray and rotting, windows broken, roof sagging. It wasn't much, but it offered shelter. I approached cautiously, making sure the area around it was clear. Inside, the floor was covered with debris, broken furniture, and dust. There were footprints in the dirt, small and large, but no one was present. I stayed behind the cabin, keeping low, trying to rest for a few hours while staying alert. That night, the sounds returned, closer this time. Footsteps circling the cabin, rustling in the underbrush, something moving with purpose. I gripped my knife, my flashlight casting a narrow beam, and waited. Hours passed without incident, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. My food was running low, and my energy was nearly gone. At dawn, I made a plan. I would follow the faint path leading downhill, hoping it would connect to a main trail or road. The hike was grueling. My legs ached, my stomach growled, and every sound made me flinch. Branches tore at my clothes, roots tripped me, and the sun burned my back through the thinning canopy. I kept moving, never stopping for more than a few seconds to catch my breath. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the glint of metal and a small clearing ahead. It was a ranger station. I stumbled toward it, exhausted, dirty, and covered in scratches, but alive. The rangers were shocked at my appearance but listened carefully as I explained. They checked the trails I had described and found evidence of someone living off the forest. Hidden campsites, footprints, makeshift traps. They told me that occasionally, people go into those mountains to live entirely off the land, often watching hikers or trespassers. It was rare, but it happened. I didn't need to hear more. I had survived. Driving home, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The mountains and the forest were beautiful, yes, but I had seen a side of them I will never forget. The isolation, the unknown, the people who hide in the wilderness. That trip left a mark on me. I learned to respect nature in a new way, to prepare for the unexpected, and to trust my instincts above all. Even now, I can picture the forest. The smell of wet pine, the sound of water over rocks, the way shadows seem to move just beyond the light. I still hike and camp, but I stay on marked trails, keep my phone close, and avoid deep, untracked woods. That experience taught me that survival is not just about skills or equipment. It's about awareness, caution, and recognizing that sometimes danger is not from the environment itself, but from the people who choose to hide within it.